Okay, hey everybody, Chuck Holton here. How's it going? We are live. Thank you for watching on CBN's YouTube channel. I'm going to give you a quick update as to what's going on in Israel, and then we'll talk about some specific things. Before I do that, I just wanted to take a moment and say, look, some people like this long-form content and some people don't. So we always get comments. Of course, you know, YouTube is the worst for, you know, just haters. Look, if you're one of those people that doesn't have time to watch an hour, I get it. I don't have time to watch an hour. I always fast forward through videos or watch them on super fast speed or something. So I'm not a patient person, and long form videos don't work real well for my personality, but there are lots of people who it does, who like this stuff. So that's why we keep cranking it out, because it's very popular. But if you're one of those people who just wants to get the facts, I've started making a daily 2-ish minute rundown on what's going on in Israel, and I put it over on my Hot Zone channel. So go to the Hot Zone with Chuck Holton here on YouTube, and you can watch that 2 minutes, just the facts, just the high points of what's going on. Don't get into a lot of analysis or anything like that. Just tell you what happened the last 24 hours here in Israel during the war, and that's it. So if you're one of those people, don't complain. Don't leave nasty comments. Just go and watch the Hot Zone. We are here to serve. So there you go. All right. For the rest of you, there is a lot to talk about because there's a lot going on in Israel, and some of it is pretty concerning. First of all, of course, the big news dominating the headlines over the last 24 hours news cycle has been the 6 hostages that were found murdered in a tunnel, and they were murdered very shortly before they were found, apparently, because the IDF heard them, in some sense, heard the shots that killed them and went looking for it. So the news has been really setting its hair on fire over this. I got my Jordan Pond water. Yes, I do. And I mean, rightfully so. It's a big deal. And it's got all of Israel in an uproar right now. It's really amazing to see how this is working. And I want to just get into how Hamas is absolutely winning on the information front, the propaganda front, the psychological front. They are just crushing the Israelis psychologically. And unfortunately, there are a large number of Israelis who are playing right into their hands, even in the government. Carolyn Glick talked about this a little bit on her show last night, but she sort of touched on it. I guess in the discussions in the war cabinet, Yoav Gallant has been pushing for look, do what we have to do to get a ceasefire so that we can get our hostages out. Now, if you've been watching me for a while, you will remember that I have been saying all along that the 2 objectives that they set before themselves at the beginning of this thing, to destroy Hamas and to get their hostages back, are not mutually exclusive, but they're mutually they're in tension with one another. Meaning, if you do what you have to do to crush Hamas, you're not likely to get a lot of your hostages back. And if you want to get your hostages back alive, you're going to have to forego destroying Hamas. That's just the reality of the situation. Well, it sounds like Yoav Gallant has been leaning a lot more toward, let's just capitulate to their demands so that we can get at least some of our hostages back. The thing is, and this is what amazes me about the fact that he's doing this, Yoav Gallant is a straight up hero in Israel, in Israeli history. Yoav Gallant was the commander of one of the special operations units I just spaced on the name of it. Sayeret, I think, something like that. And he was on so many unbelievably dangerous raids. I mean, nobody can doubt this guy's fortitude for sure, because he was like a cross between Rambo and, James Bond when he was a younger man. This guy was there for so many of the unbelievably dangerous missions and bold and audacious things that the Mossad and the IDF have done throughout Israel's history. I've been reading this book, Rise and Kill First, and Yoav Gallant is throughout this whole thing. He's been there almost since the beginning, and holy cow, to see him being the guy who's saying, let's just cave to Hamas and let them have what they want, and just try to get some of our hostages back. I think either it shows that he has really mellowed with age at the very least. And, a lot of old soldiers get that way. I remember when I was a kid meeting, most of the guys in my church were Vietnam veterans. And I grew up around these Vietnam veterans. And a lot of them were very jaded and very bitter and very just sort of turned off by the military, the government, because of what happened to them in Vietnam. And they were not, and now that I'm getting to be that old soldier, I can see where they're coming from. I can see that you look back at what the United States did in Afghanistan, for example, 20 years in Afghanistan. We spent $1 billion a week for 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. I mean, that just makes you go like, what was that all for? And you don't lose faith in your fellow soldiers. You lose faith in the leadership that sends you off on these ridiculous missions. And so I guess in some way I can kind of see how Gallant could get to the point where he's at, but I guess he's always been pretty left-wing anyway. But man, it's just amazing to see this because, look, Israel has two choices. They can win the war and safeguard their population from, at least for a time, from further destruction, further death and danger and militancy. I'm trying not to say the T word because it'll get us demonetized here. Terraforming, terrible things that they will do. So I mean, they have an opportunity now to actually make a difference for their people and make their people safer for a good long time to come. Maybe not forever, certainly not forever, because these things go in cycles. But if you look back through the history of Israel, and I've been studying it intensively since I've been here, they go in waves. They get attacked. They get hurt pretty bad in the first attack because of their hubris. They don't believe that it could happen, and then they pull together and they do what they have to do to vanquish their enemies, at least to the point where things calm down, and then they have a period of calm, and then things start ramping up again, and then they have to smack those bad guys and put them back under their rocks, and then things are calm for a while, and it's on and on and on. It's just a cycle. I was reading an article today from 2018 that was saying there will likely be another Intifada sometime in the next 5 years. And they gave a bunch of reasons, and these were, some of them were, there's one American, they asked a bunch of quote unquote experts in this article. One of them was an American guy that works for a think tank in the United States, and the rest were Palestinian leaders. And all of them were saying the same thing. Yes, there has to be. There's going to be another Intifada. So now what we're seeing is that Yoav Gallant was in this closed door meeting and was saying, you know, they're going to start killing the hostages and this is going to get really bad. And, you know, like he was forecasting all this stuff. And then he leaked it himself to the press, what he had said in there. And so it got out into the press. And wouldn't you know it, shortly after he said that, these 6 hostages were deleted in Gaza, and very, very horribly. A video came out today, just a little while ago, from Hamas that showed video of all 6 of these hostages while they were still alive. And it just showed a little clip of each of the 6 hostages and then said at the bottom, at the end of the short video, it said, their final messages will be coming soon. So they are engaging in psychological warfare to hurt the Israeli people and to get the Israeli people fighting among themselves. And some of the Israeli people are falling right into their trap. So there were 10,000 people or something in Tel Aviv last night, and today the labor union shut down and the whole country was sort of paralyzed. They shut down the airport for a while. And these people are protesting for a ceasefire agreement. But they're not protesting saying, Hamas, you had better agree to a ceasefire. You had better agree to a ceasefire. We demand a ceasefire from Hamas. That's not what they're doing. They're demanding a ceasefire from Bibi Netanyahu. And the only way right now that he could get a ceasefire would be to completely cave to Hamas's demands, which would mean ending the war, pulling all of the troops out of Gaza, giving up the Philadelphia corridor, opening it back up for business, and within a few years, at a maximum, there's going to be another attack. It would completely destroy all the work that the IDF has done since October 20th, when they went into Gaza. And these extremely naive protesters are literally protesting. They don't think so, but they are. They are protesting on behalf of Hamas. They are doing exactly what Hamas wants them to do. As a matter of fact, on Amir Tsarfati's Telegram channel, let's see if I can get to that real quick. He published a photograph of, where'd he go? There he is. He published a photograph of a document that was found. Let's see if I can find it. There was a document found in a tunnel in Gaza that, maybe it was Manny's. Oh, no, here it is. I didn't have time to load it up, and it's all in Hebrew anyway, Hebrew and Arabic. But here is the handwritten document they found in the tunnel. Here's the Hebrew translation. And I'll just read you what Amir says that it says, since I don't read Hebrew. Dadgummit. Where'd it go? Channel 12 has published a document found in a Gaza tunnel where Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar had been located. The document contains guidelines for Hamas officials and operatives. Number 1, increase the production of photos and video clips showing the hostages in order to create psychological pressure on Israel. Number 2, do everything to increase the psychological pressure on Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Number 3, push the line of thinking that Netanyahu is responsible for everything that happens. And number 4, damage the Israeli narrative that the military ground operation aids the return of the hostages. And guess what? That is exactly what these protesters across the country are doing. They are following Yahya Sinwar's directives to a T. And they probably don't get it. Now look, if that was one of my kids inside Gaza, I would be saying, I really wish they would do whatever it takes to get get my son or daughter back. And I would be absolutely crushed knowing what they're probably facing in there. But at the same time, and so you can understand why the families would want them to just do whatever you have to do to get my son back. But that would be a selfish thing for me to say, if I were to say that. That would not be taking into account the best interests of my nation. That would be putting myself above my country. And that's not really how we're meant to act. If we're supposed to be selfless, that means embracing the hard stuff. It's easy to support your country when it doesn't cost you anything. Are you going to support your country when it does cost you something? This is a lesson for all of us. And so these protesters, I get it, you know, they want a ceasefire agreement, but they're yelling at the wrong guy. Because there is no ceasefire proposal on the table right now that is in any way acceptable to Israel as a country. It might be acceptable to the families of those people who are still stuck in there. And you know what? This is what's so cynical about all that, is those people that are calling, they know without a doubt that Hamas is not going to release all of the hostages they have. They're going to release a few. They don't even know where all of them are. They can't even find 30 of them. So Hamas probably has 22 of the, 66 hostages that are still alive. And so these families, some of the families are actually telling Netanyahu, you do what you have to do. Yes, I want my son back, but I'm not going to put my needs above the needs of my country. And that's the right thing to say. But the other families, what they're saying is, give away the store in hopes that my kid will be one of the 20 or so that we're going to manage to get out. There's a very real possibility that they will not get any more hostages out alive. There's a very real possibility of that. And everybody had better just make that okay in their head. I mean, just come to peace with that. Because if Israel is going to win this war, and they could win in Gaza, they have to make the hard choices. You can't do the easy thing and expect to win. You've got to be able to just make the hard choices and say, if you take one of our people as a hostage, we're not going to ask for him back. We're just going to hurt you until you beg to give him back. That's how wars get won. Now, I actually was having a long conversation with an AI chatbot today and asked it this question. I said, name for me one war that was won by the proportionate use of force. And it came back and said, I can't find one. It doesn't appear that there are any wars that were won by the proportionate use of force. As a matter of fact, the only wars that I find that were decisively won were won through a disproportionate use of force, overwhelming force. Because you can't defeat your enemy without actually offending him. You've got to go all in. Now, I think Netanyahu understands that. But there are many people in the world who don't. And, somebody might say, well, aren't we supposed to turn the other? The Goy is saying, can you imagine a Christian saying all this? Yes, I can. I can imagine a Christian saying all this, because the government's job is to protect its nation. The king's job is to protect his people. If you've read Romans 13 anytime recently, it literally talks about the soldiers and the police and says that they are God's agent of wrath against the evildoer. They are designated by God to wield the sword violently in order to protect their people. And that is the most loving thing that a king can do, or a leader can do for his country, is wield the sword justly. There is a just way of killing. As C.S. Lewis once wrote, all killing is not murder, just like all sex is not adultery. Very wise words from a wise man. So there are these protesters who are like, they're willing to just give away their country in order to get back a few, not all, but a few of the hostages. And they're just hoping that the ones that they get back will be the one that they want to get out, the one they know, the one they're related to. And that's a pretty cynical thing, actually. Look, you got to do the hard things if you're going to win. That's true in war, it's true in life. You gotta lay it all out there. And wow, that was chewy. Got a lot of pulp in that one. So after all these protests, you got to ask yourself, what are they hoping to accomplish by those? Are they really hoping that they're going to put enough pressure on the government that the government's going to go, okay, well, we'll just capitulate. We'll give in to Hamas's demands. There are plenty of left-wing people out there who really believe that all you have to do to be done with the war, to get the war to end, is just stop. You just stop fighting and the war will end. But if your enemy's not done fighting, then that's not called ending the war. That's called losing the war. So I wouldn't deign to try to school Yoav Gallant on courage. Yoav Gallant has proven himself thousands of times in the field. He's a national hero. And I think it's right that they have somebody like that on the war cabinet as the Minister of Defense. But it's sad to see him. I don't know if he's caving to these. He's seeing all these people out there. Maybe he's just way smarter than all the rest of us. Hi, Chuck, wondering why the IDF doesn't just take the fight straight to Iran and cripple the regime, as they are the root cause. I've asked that question many, many times, Mick Roos. And obviously that, the world is already staunchly against Israel in this fight. Much of the world, not most of the world, much of the world sees Israel as the aggressor in this war, even though Israel was attacked. There was a ceasefire on October 6th. So I don't know. It's a good question. Now, so we do need to pray for the leadership. We need to pray for everyone on that war cabinet, that they will have wisdom to do the right thing and to be able to see several moves down the road, or, several moves ahead, so that, maybe by cleverness, they can overcome their enemies in a way that would be much more expensive if they tried it through force. That has always been a hallmark of the Mossad. It's always been a hallmark of Israeli culture, even, that they put a very high value on cleverness. Don't just go right up the middle. Find a way to go around that obstacle, to go under it, over it. Don't just try to bull your way through it all the time. And perhaps Gallant has in his head an idea that's a little more clever than just continuing to do what they've been doing for 10 and a half months. The problem with, just from a military man's point of view, the problem I see with what the IDF has been doing in Gaza is not the kinetic operations that they've been doing. It's the fact that they've been also doing everything they can to support the people there, which by default, by definition, is supporting Hamas. And it's really hard to win a war when you're supporting your enemy with this hand and fighting him with that hand. We learned that lesson. Well, I don't think we learned the lesson, but we should have learned that lesson in Afghanistan, because that's exactly what we were doing in Afghanistan. We were paying the Taliban on one hand and fighting the Taliban on the other hand. And that means that we just keep fighting forever until we run out of money, and then we go home and lose. And that's exactly what happened. So we need to pray for those leaders, that they'll be wise and they'll be clever. Okay, let's talk about the intifadas. Now, if you're old enough to remember the first two intifadas, like I am, the first one was 93, I think, to 97, something like that. And it was actually not as violent as the second one by a long shot. About 200 Israelis died in that intifada, and about 1,200 Palestinians. These things are always, when the Palestinians attack Israel, the human cost is always worse for the Palestinians. They end up hurting themselves more than they are able to hurt Israel. It doesn't belittle any of the pain and suffering that the Israelis have gone through. It's just arithmetic, okay? So that first intifada was more of a grassroots movement, a lot of rock throwing, Molotov cocktails, things like that. But the second intifada was much more organized. Second intifada went from 2000 to 2005, and it was marked by a tremendous amount of violence. Shootings, ramming, stabbings, and lots of, you know, people going kablooey. I got to be careful the words I use. And people in cars going kablooey. And in one particular month, the worst month of the second intifada was March of 2002. And I think there were 13 IEDs, just improvised kablooey devices that went off in that 1 month. 13 in 1 month. Most of them were cars packed with water balloons, you know, stuff that goes kablooey. And they were, I forget how many people died, but it was at least, I want to say it was 30, 35 people died, a couple hundred probably wounded in all of that. They called it Black March of 2002. And the reason that I titled this video The Third Intifada is because I went back and I was like, well, how do we know it was an intifada? Like, did an imam declare an intifada? Like, okay, get out there and do an intifada, everybody. No, that's not how it happened. The historians, after the fact, went back and said, ooh, you know, this event kind of kicked everything off and got everybody riled up. And so they went out and did a lot of shenanigans for about 5 years. And so we're going to call that, we're going to just bracket that and call that the intifada. And so you don't know, I mean, the people at the beginning in 2000, it was like August of 2000, something like that. Or no, August 2001, for example, there was a gigantic SV bid that went off in the Sbarro pizza shop right over here on Jaffa Street, just a couple blocks from where I'm standing. It's not a pizza shop anymore, but the building's still there. And it killed a lot of people. And it was horrific. It's like 7 kids were killed. I mean, I remember when that happened. That was August like 9th of 2001. Those people didn't know, oh, well, we're in an intifada. No wonder. This is why this is happening. It was called the Intifada later. So the reason I say all that is that how would we know if we were already in what will end up being called the third Intifada? Well, the second Intifada resulted in the deaths of about 1,000 Israelis. Do you know how many Israelis have died since October 7th? About 1,669 when I checked today. And so this could be the third Intifada as well. As like I said, there were lots of these VBIDs. VBIDs is vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, or a car kablooey, car balloon, car bombastic. You know what I'm saying. I just have to be careful with the algorithm. There were, in that worst month, they had 13 of those in 1 month. Well, in the last 3 days, here in Israel, in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria and Hebron, they have foiled 5 car bombs. Well, not foiled all of them. 2 of them went off. 2 of them went off at a gas station. Fortunately, nobody was killed. One of them they found, and they detonated it today. They found it before it could, hurt anybody. And the IDF brought in the explosives ordnance disposal, and they blew it up. And then there were 2 others that they found trying to get into Jerusalem, downtown Jerusalem, where we're standing. There were 2 other vans packed with explosives that they were trying to smuggle in to downtown Jerusalem, and they captured them before anything happened. So that's 5 in 3 days. At that rate, this month will be worse than Black March in 2002. And there's red alerts coming in on my phone now. There have been some today, not a ton, but some. So this is concerning. I mentioned yesterday that there was a palace. I'm going to do a whole podcast on this. As a matter of fact, I plan to talk about this over on my channel in about 27 minutes. So if you're watching now, open a new browser tab and go to YouTube and go look up The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton and subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as soon as I get done with this podcast, I'm going to go over there and I'm going to talk about this. That we're going to talk about all the ways that I have found just in the last month that the United States is sending U.S. taxpayer money over here and giving it to the enemies of Israel to help support their cause, not Israel's cause. Now, we're giving a lot of money to Israel too, but this is par for the course. The United States has gotten very, very good at funding both sides of conflicts, and it's egregious. If you're a taxpayer like me, if you have to sign that check every year and grit your teeth while you do it to the U.S. Treasury, if you find out, when I tell you on my channel, The Hot Zone, here in a few minutes, when I tell you what is in all the different ways, it's like 6 different ways that I've found that the United States is sending U.S. taxpayer dollars, and it is getting either intentionally or unintentionally to either Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. I mean, just all the enemies of Israel are being supported by U.S. tax dollars. And this is not conspiracy theory. This is stuff that I have tracked down, and you can find it yourself. You can just Google it. If you know what to look for, you'll find it yourself. And I'm going to tell you one of them right now. Yesterday, there was a Palestinian militant who was driving around in Hebron, and he saw some policemen by the side of the road, and he pulled up next to him and went pew, 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 and eliminated 3 Israeli policemen, 2 men and a woman. One of the men had already lost a son in the war, on October 7th. And now his family is without the son and the father. They left about 7 kids behind among the 3 of them. Okay, these were policemen out there doing their job. And this guy just drove up and did a drive-by, pew, 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 and just eliminated 3 of them. The IDF mounted a massive operation against to find this guy because he drove off. They eventually found him in a building in Hebron down there in southern West Bank. And they surrounded the building and they did what's called a pressure cooker on that building, where they just surround it and everybody starts shooting at it all at once. Just bam, 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 just unloading and throwing grenades in there. And then they eventually shot an anti-tank missile into the building and they liquidated this guy, and he took the room temperature challenge. They went in and recovered his body. And when they brought it out and identified him, it turns out this guy was a presidential guard for Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority. The presidential guard would be like Secret Service for Mahmoud Abbas. Now, the absolutely maddening thing about that is if you go and do a little research, the United States funds and trains the presidential guard for Mahmoud Abbas. And we have been since 2005, since the George W. Bush administration. And we have given them something like $550 million since that program started, and it's still ongoing today. The United States is giving equipment and possibly weapons and lots of money and sending trainers over here to train the presidential guard for Mahmoud Abbas. And one of those guys just went out and murdered 3 Israeli policemen with that training. Now, if that doesn't get you fired up, I don't know what will. If to know that your money is going to pay for that kind of, shenanigans is enough to just make me want to set my hair on fire. So this is a huge issue. And I keep finding more and more ways that the United States is sending money. I don't mind them sending money to support Israel. We need to be supporting Israel. We have obligations to support Israel. We have made treaties with Israel. Okay, we should live up to our word. As much as I don't like paying my taxes, if they got to spend it on something, I don't mind them spending it on Israel. But to be giving it at the same time to Israel's enemies, to fund them and help them recruit and train the next wave of militants to come in here and commit shenanigans against Israel, just makes my blood boil. And I think it should for you too. Now, let's see, we got to, I want to go on and talk about that some more, but first let's talk a little more about the intifadas. Whereas the first intifada involved stone throwing, protests, Molotov cocktails, things like that. The second one was a lot more militarized. The third one, if we're in a third one, is going to be marked by even more violence and a high-grade insurgency taking place coming out of this area right over here, surrounding Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and Hebron, the Palestinian communities in there. And this is, because of the news of the hostages that were killed and all that, this has kind of been missed by some of the media, or at least it's not top of the page where it would have been otherwise. But this operation that's ongoing in that area in the West Bank is coming up with a whole lot of Hamas stuff and people. And so if they get done vanquishing Hamas in Gaza, they're just getting started. They're going to have to go over here, and they're going to be dealing with this for a long time. But you heard me say several weeks ago I expect there to be a wave of IEDs, SV bids, suicide vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, and IEDs, just roadside improvised explosive devices, and other stuff as well. I expect that is going to ramp up, and it looks like in the last 3 days, Israel has gotten very, very lucky to thwart 3 of the 5 SV bids that were attempted to bring in here. And the other 2 that they weren't able to thwart went off and just by some miracle didn't kill anybody. Blew up a gas station where I got gas, not at that station, but out in that area just the other day. So the problem with this is Israel, facing this kind of a threat. If Iran has been pumping materiel, military-style weapons, explosives, ammunition, all that kind of stuff into the West Bank, if if Iran has been pumping that stuff in there, and they have a lot of it in there, they're going to be able to go bigger than they went last time. And that's what Iran wants. And Israel may have to end up doing to the West Bank what it's done to Gaza. And the enemy only has to be right once. Israel has to be right every time. And so there's a very good chance, given human nature, that Israel will not be right every time, and they will eventually see a horrific number of casualties from a SV bid or IED. And when those things start going off in here, what happened during the second Intifada was that, nobody wanted to come to Israel because it's like, I don't know. I mean, there were these things going off in coffee shops and line for the ATM and everywhere, pizza places and all that stuff. So do you want to come sit in a coffee shop if something might go kablooey right next to you? I don't. And I tell you what, everywhere I go around here now, I am hyper vigilant. I am watching. I'm like, okay, here's a big crowd of people. I don't want to be here. I want to not be in this big crowd of people. I want to be someplace where there's not a big crowd of people right now. Because big crowd of people to me looks like big target. And I'm not the only one who sees it that way. So this is something for us to pray for Israel. Now, so just to recap, because I've got a lot of people on that weren't on a little while ago, an intifada only gets designated as such after the fact. And so the people that are living through an intifada don't call it that necessarily, at least not at the beginning. And so we may very well be in the beginning of the third intifada. Once the history books are written, they may look back and they may say October 7th was the beginning of the third intifada. And it starts out with this one started out with more conventional military operations, and it is very quickly morphing into an insurgency. And they've been in a low-grade insurgency for decades, but it's morphing into a very high-grade insurgency, especially in the last few days. So this is a big deal that we should be praying about. Now, let's go back. What happens when China makes this move? We're going to give them money too, probably. Wouldn't surprise me. Lottie Block. That seems to be the Americans, the government's answer to everything. Oh, let's spend some money on it. We'll give them some money. We'll throw some money over there. That'll fix it. Usually what it ends up doing is exacerbating the problem that we're trying to address. I could do a whole podcast on that, ways that I've seen that happen. What do you expect from our present government? Well, what Joe Biden said today, he threw Bibi Netanyahu under the bus yet again in a candid comment when he was asked by a reporter about the peace process. he said he really didn't think that Netanyahu had done enough to get to a ceasefire with Hamas, even though Hamas hasn't even been there at the table, and their demands that they're conveying through shuttle diplomacy is completely non-starter for Israel. The demands are essentially, if you just boil it down, Israel, you must agree to surrender and lose the war, and then we can have a ceasefire. That is Hamas's demands in a nutshell. And they are so patently ridiculous, no serious person would look at the offer that's on the table and say, oh, Israel just needs to split the difference and just compromise a little more and they can get to a deal. No. Do you understand that ever since this process started, the only people the United States has put pressure on to move closer to the other side are the Israelis? They've never once tried to put pressure on Hamas to get them to move closer to the Israelis. So let's, I'm going back here. What's the best thing that U.S. taxpayers can do about this? Vote. Vote for people who are not going to waste your money. Vote for people who are going to make the government smaller, not bigger. And there may not be anybody on the ballot to do that, but do your best. Hold your nose and do your best. Okay, we got a few minutes. Let's see here. How is it that no one is talking about Egypt's obvious involvement given the vast amount of tunnels going into their country from Gaza, and yet they're trying to help broker a peace deal? Yeah, Egypt is not it's not a dependable partner for peace, let's say. Egypt's biggest concern about this whole thing is economic. Their economy is getting crushed by the war because of the loss of shipping. And a lot of people made a lot of money smuggling stuff into Gaza, and they're not able to do that anymore. So everybody that lives along the border on the Egyptian side is pretty much out of work. All that money trickles down throughout the whole economy just on the other side of the border, on the northern border of Egypt. And so by shutting off all those tunnels, they put a lot of people out of work down there. And so those people just want an end to the war so that they can get back to business as usual. We've been waiting for the other shoe to drop. This could spread worldwide very fast. Do you think this is what we could be facing worldwide? KP1 asks. I think we already are. I mean, who's not involved in this? China's just taking advantage of this conflict and all the other conflicts that have been started around the world to achieve it, try and push its own goals. But Russia is involved in this war. The United States is involved in this war. Iran is involved in this war. North Korea is involved in this war. Who's not? I mean, the major players. I mean, Argentina isn't involved yet, but they might be getting there. So I think we are in the opening stages of World War II. I mean, I'm sorry, not World War II, World War III. I have said, you've heard me say this many times, that World War III is not going to look like World War II did. It's going to look very different. It's going to look like this. Okay, I think I've made it to the top of... If you have a question, just put the word question in all caps and then write your question in all caps, and it'll make it easier for me to see it here. The responsibility of the head of household is to protect... Okay, that's a comment, not a question. What do you think about a big Christian in Iran? I'd want out of there pretty bad. I'm not sure what you're asking, Greg. There are lots of Christians in Iran who would like to get out, and some of them are getting out. But that's all. Is it fair to blame the Biden administration for the loss of hostages due to their approach to Israel? That is a very good question, Jesse. A lot of people are. A lot of people are blaming the Biden administration. If you want to blame the Biden administration for what happened in Gaza, the thing that you would blame them for is for trying to force Israel for all of the pressure they put on Israel to lose the war. to continue this thing. Because if Israel had been completely supported, I mean, if I had been president and had my way on October 7th, I wouldn't have just sent some ships over here to, stand by and be moral support for Israel. I would have sent ships over here and Marines and everybody else and said, you can make use of all of our troops and let's get this over with fast, because there's Americans that are being held hostage in Gaza. And so guess what? The IDF is not going to be the only soldiers in there. Our soldiers are going to go in and we are going to tear that place apart until we find those hostages. I would have been calling Mahmoud Abbas. I would have been calling and telling him, get a message to Yahya Sinwar that we are going to absolutely tear that place apart. There will be no water. There will be no food. There will be no electricity. There will be nothing except suffering in Gaza until we get our Americans out of there. That would have been what I would have said. But that's just me. And, you can take me out of the army, but you can't take the army out of me. So, maybe that wouldn't be the most diplomatic thing to say, but I've never been known for my diplomacy. So there you have it. How many leftists in Israel? Oh man, a lot. Israel suffers from the same division that the United States suffers from. I tell people all the time over here, they say, what do Americans think about this or that? And I say, which America are you talking about? There's two of them. There are two countries living in America, and they are mutually exclusive. They almost cannot exist in the same space because their worldviews are self-contradictory. I mean, their worldviews are completely contradictory. If you were to boil it down to its most foundational precept, one America believes that some things are right and some things are wrong, and what I think about those things doesn't change whether they're right or wrong. Right or wrong isn't like flavors of ice cream. It's like penicillin. It's life or death. That's what one half of America believes. The other half of America believes that, yeah, you live your truth. You do what feels good to you. Right and wrong are your opinion. There's no such thing as actual truth. You just do what feels good. And they don't see how self-contradictory that worldview is, because what they're really saying is it's objectively true that there is no objective truth. And since they can't see that, and they believe a self-contradictory worldview, they are depraved. That is the definition of depravity. Depravity is when you see bad things as good and good things as bad. And if you believe that it's true that there is no truth, you are going to see bad things as good and good things as bad. Boys can be girls, girls can be boys, whatever you want, right? That's what depravity looks like. So I'm getting into preaching here, but the point of that is, just to answer your question, Israel suffers from many of the same ailments that the United States does in that regard. There are hard leftists, many of them are in government. There's a real, legit deep state here in Israel, and they cause all the same kind of problems here that we see in the United States caused by the left as well. What good does voting do when Dominion is involved? Edward, not even going to touch that question. Are there any Americans employed by Mossad? I don't think so. Let's see. Does the president of Israel have any say in this, or is he just a ceremonial president? The prime minister, I believe, has more say in this. I don't think the president is on the war cabinet. It's of course, a parliamentary system a little different than what we have in the United States. I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but I'm sure that I'll get emails from people who will explain it to me after this. Will Bibi's government survive? Likely not. Bibi's government likely will not survive. There was a very good video that somebody sent me today that was a conversation with an IDF reserve colonel here in Israel, and he was speaking very, very candidly about the clown show that is the upper levels of the Israeli IDF, the government, all the leadership, and he just was pulling no punches. And I'm like, man, if an American colonel said that, he'd be turning in his, his commission the next day. He'd be getting the boot, and maybe this guy will too. I was kind of amazed that he was so candid. And if you want to see it, I'll put it up on chuckholton.com. So I'll put a link to that video. Just go to chuckholton.com. You can see the video for free. If you want to subscribe to be able to see some subscriber-only content, you can do that. That's also free. You can also sign up to support me on a monthly basis, and I very much appreciate that. Helps me be more independent of YouTube, and that's always a good thing. And you can get other, special content for being a supporter over there as well. $7 a month. It's not a big deal. But if you appreciate this kind of content and you appreciate the commentary and being able to ask and get your questions answered, then think about going over and not only subscribing here on CBN's YouTube channel, but subscribing to my YouTube channel over there as well. Okay, we got 4 minutes. I want to pray, and then we're going to go. Okay, so let's say a prayer. Lord God, we just come to you humbly right now, and we bless your name. We are so tired of this conflict, and we know that the Israelis have got to be even more tired than we are. Lord, I pray for Israel, pray for peace here. Pray that you would give the commanders and the leaders, especially Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant and all the other leadership in the war cabinet, special supernatural knowledge and discernment and wisdom. I pray that you'd give them unity, Father, in what to do and how to do it, and that you would lead them on a path that leads to peace, not just for them, but for everyone involved in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, even in Iran. I pray that you would continue to thwart the plans of evil men. We thank you so much for supernaturally protecting Jerusalem from these 5 car bombs that almost got through. And we can see your hand in that, Father. Thank you that we can come directly to you and we can ask you for what we desire, that you want us to come to you like little children and say, Daddy, I want this. I want this to happen. And that you delight in giving us good gifts. So, Lord, we pray that you would hear our prayers. There are thousands of people praying with me right now. Hear our prayers for the peace of Jerusalem and grant those prayers, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Thank you very much for watching. Again, please go to cbn.com and donate over there to keep CBN on the air. We're funded by our viewers, so that's the way you keep us going. We appreciate all of you being here. Thank you for all your questions and comments. If you didn't get your question answered, I know people get really mad that I missed their question or whatever. You can email me. Just go to hotzoneholton@gmail.com and I will answer your questions directly on email, hotzoneholton@gmail.com. I get a lot of emails, but I do my best to answer all of them if I can. If I don't answer it, it's just I just was too busy, or else I just didn't have anything to say about whatever you asked. But I'll try. I'll try. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.